Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. India and the United States have pledged to continue their strong bilateral strategic partnership, the Pentagon said, after a meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. Mattis met the Prime Minister on the sidelines of the International Institute for Strategic Studies 17th Asia Security Summit, also known as the Shangri-La Dialogue, in Singapore on Saturday. The two discussed the importance of the US-India relationship and the role of both nations in cooperating to uphold international laws and principles and to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific. They also affirmed their commitment to maintaining peace, stability and prosperity in the region. On this edition of India's World, we'll take a closer look at the strategic partnership between Washington and New Delhi. Joining me on the program today are Pramit Choudhary, foreign editor at the Hindustan Times, Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Ajay, Lele, senior fellow, Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. What do you make of the India-US strategic partnership?
I think it's in great shape. I think it's the best that we have had. It started developing and evolving about 17, 18 years ago with the visit of President Bill Clinton here. And over this period, whatever governments have come in the United States, notwithstanding, whether it's Republican or Democratic, the India-US partnership has been on the ascendant. And likewise here also, the first few years of this century, we saw Mr. Vajpayee, after that 10 years, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and now Prime Minister Modi. So it has been on the ascendant. There were some doubts that were expressed or uncertainties when Mr. Trump took charge as President of the United States, because he has never occupied any government office. He's not, so his views in that sense were not really well known. And what he had also been speaking that, the United States should withdraw from all its engagements and commitments in different parts of the world, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Korea, Japan, etc. So there were some uncertainties and some wariness, but then both Prime Minister and Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, they had spoken on telephone. But when he visited in June last year, that was a very good visit, very successful visit. And that really took our relationship to the next higher level. And after that, whatever has transpired, whether it is the South Asia strategy, which was announced in August last year, or it was the national security strategy, which was announced by America in December last year, or it was the tweet that came out on the 1st of January against Pakistan, the fact that the United States, against its earlier pronouncements, agreed to put in more troops in Afghanistan and basically said that we are not going to be limited by any time, artificial time limit, but we will try to restore peace and stability in that country. And also putting pressure on Pakistan to stop providing safe havens to terrorism.
Sure.
So all that, and now most recently, if we look at what Secretary of State, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis has said, what the new Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said in his Senate confirmation hearings, where he says that India should be the most significant partner as far as United States is concerned, right, in taking forward its South Asia and Southeast Asia policies. And what Jim Mattis has said, that this is a key. We fully support the emergence of India as a major global power, and we want India as a key partner in taking forward its policies in the Indo-Pacific to make it a safe, secure and prosperous region.
Indeed. Captain Lele, as far as the strategic partnership itself is concerned, where do you think it's headed?
I think strategic partnership started, it was a slow process, slow but steady process. As Ambassador has pointed out, it started way back during Vajpayee Saab's era with Stoke Talbot and Jaswant Singh talks. And further, it has reached to a level now where we are talking on various issues. Even though we call it as a strategic partnership, I think one has to look at this partnership at various levels. One is at the economic level, other is at a strategic or a geopolitical level, and third is a people-to-people contact. Because at every respect, if one goes into the details of it, there is something which is there for India to offer to the US. and US understands that importance. So from that perspective, one should not get bogged down with a strategic partnership only as a partnership where US is selling arms to India, but there is something more to it. There is something more to it at a political level. China becomes a significant factor. US has got great expectations as far as Afghanistan is concerned from India. So these are the two issues which are very important at a political level. At people-to-people contact, we got tremendous amount of a huge diaspora which is working in US, and it is not only working in US, it is contributing greatly to the growth of United States also. And US is fully aware of those facts. So when one is looking at the strategic partnership, I think it is important to understand all these minor nuances also, because they play a major role into a larger picture.
Right. You know, Pramit Pal Choudhary, as far as what the Pentagon has done in the recent past, you know, it has renamed the Pacific Command as the Indo-Pacific
yes.
Command. You know, is it a move to signal to India how important India is to the US military?
Yeah, I mean, it basically argues in this way, America in many ways is following what India has recommended on the Western and Indian Ocean, which is that one, you cannot separate the Indian Ocean from the Pacific Ocean as a strategic space, especially if China is your primary concern, because China is moving into both oceans simultaneously. There was some initial resistance from the Americans, and remember they played around with the term Indo-Asia-Pacific for a while. Now they've essentially adopted that wholesale. We've seen the resurrection of the Quad, which initially we had helped create, in many ways provided leadership to in its first form, and now we're seeing America accept that this potentially is going to be a future method by which countries who subtext is obviously opposed China can come together. And we saw at the Shangri-La dialogue the speech that Mattis gave out very strongly, and if you match Mattis's speech with what Prime Minister Modi said, it's remarkable how many terms and phrases were actually used by both. So I think conceptually, there's no doubt that the two sides, at least on the Indo-Pacific air concept, both agree more or less. And you can see that, for example, we led the battle against the Belt Road Initiative. America initially supported Belt Road, and now they are now the most, at least verbally again, the most vociferous opponents of the Belt Road Initiative against China. So we can see that the problem that we'll face now, and this is the difficult part, is that converting this conceptualization into actual things on the ground, right? America is fundamentally a Pacific power in all of this. We are obviously almost overwhelmingly an Indian Ocean power. We have very little presence in the Pacific. Our priorities will always be slightly different from the Americans. We can already see that in the Quad, where the Americans are saying, let's use it to focus on the BRI. India is saying the Quad maybe not really designed only for infrastructure. Maybe we should be looking more in terms of the maritime sphere. That is going to be a process that's going to take a while, and it's converting the big ideas into these, you know, nuts and bolts on the ground. That is going to be, I think, the real challenge over the next few years.
Sure. You know, Ambassador, is India ready to play the Indo-Pacific game? Are we willing to up the ante in the region?
I think that's a very valid question, and it's a big question. But I would suggest that the very fact that Prime Minister Modi decided to go to Singapore to deliver the 17th Shangri-La dialogue is in itself an assertion that India is ready and it is willing and it is capable to play a very significant role there. Because otherwise, if you see, the ASEAN countries particularly have always been very, very anxious that India should step in and play a more active and contribute in a more significant manner to whatever is happening in Southeast Asia. And India has been hesitant, India has been seen to be reluctant, whether in different ways, not only in strategic terms, but also in economic terms, also in trade, investment. You look at the sort of discussions, negotiations that have been going on, even on RCEP, for instance, you know, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And Prime Minister Modi did say very categorically that on RCEP in his Shangri-La dialogue address that we hope to conclude it very, very soon. But coming to these strategic aspects, I think the assertions that Prime Minister Modi made that we want to be there so that it is to make it a region of peace, security and prosperity, and it is not, we are not working against any country, but we want to cooperate. We want it to be an inclusive process, and that is what and our relationship, our association with ASEAN does not stem from a few decades or few centuries. We have been there from time immemorial. So yes, we will come there, and even in terms of action, if you look at what was achieved just during this visit, without going back to what has happened in the past, the decision on the Sabang port that we will develop it and we will have access to it in terms of infrastructure, promoting tourism and so on and so forth. Indonesia is our maritime neighbor. Then also signing the first vision document on maritime security, maritime cooperation in the Indo-Pacific with Indonesia. That is a major step forward. Also in terms of Singapore, signing this logistics agreement where we are going to do exercises and take our relationship forward. That is also a big step. So if you look at different countries, for the first time last month we also had naval exercises with Vietnam.
Yes.
So by and large, if you take it forward, I feel reasonably confident that India will walk the talk, although that has many a times been the question that will we be able to fulfill the commitments that we are making. But here I think the very fact that the Prime Minister was present, he made a very bold and a comprehensive statement of what we want to do and how we want to take our association forward. So I feel confident that we'll be able to put the money where our mouth is. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to take a cue from what the ambassador just said and ask my next question, Captain. As far as the Prime Minister's three-nation visit is concerned, do you believe there's a message for all the stakeholders in the region from the visit?
Definitely. If you slightly go back, on 26th of Jan, we had all ASEAN heads on the same dais over here. So India's Act East policy is definitely been a very constructive policy where engagement has been very fruitful. So from that point of view, whenever India's Prime Minister is going to the eastern parts of the world, definitely it is giving a certain amount of a message. Now this message could be read at two levels. One is that it is at a bilateral level. We are very keen to engage the contacts with those individual nations. But at a multilateral level, one can understand that China is increasing its stakes day by day into the entire Indian Ocean region, South China Sea, so on and so forth. So from that perspective also, definitely India is giving certain amount of indirect messaging to China that we exist and we got very good relationship with all these countries over here. Those relationships, again, if you really look at India's policies, go back to Indian history. So we are trying to develop those relationships not based on only economical factors, but there are a lot of cultural factors which have been weaved into it. So this is, I feel, is a very clever ploy to play with, where we are trying to engage those nations, not saying that yes, we are only interested to do a anti-China sort of a policy, but we are trying to constructively engage those nations. So from that point of view, I think Prime Minister's visit is very significant.
Sure. And talking about the region itself, Pramit, what's at stake for India and the United States in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, the obvious thing, as Captain Lele has mentioned, is the assertiveness of China. When you look at it in the past 15 years, China has essentially deliberately provoked a maritime dispute with almost all of its neighbors running from Japan all the way down to Indonesia. And these are disputes that didn't exist before this. It has declared, Xi Jinping has declared that he will attempt the grand unification of China. In this case means he has defined as taking over Taiwan. And since the last remnant of that grand unification of China is Arunachal Pradesh, we presume at some point that may also come into the picture. China has been basically violative of, we were talking about following international rules, and we saw with the Hague Tribunal that China in effect defied a tribunal that it itself had signed up for, to say that we will obey this tribunal under the UN Treaty of the Sea, And then when the tribunal actually issued a judgment, China said, well, we're going to ignore it.
But was it also partly the Philippines' fault? Probably if they would have followed up, some action could have been taken.
Well, the Philippines you can only argue that the Philippines perhaps was unrealistic in thinking that China would obey the judgment. But under international law, it's very clear. China signed up to agree. They're a member of the Hague Tribunal.
Yes.
They're a member of the UN treaty. And so when you sign up for such a treaty, you assume that when you're before a tribunal, you will obey what that tribunal says. Otherwise, what is the point of any multilateral organization that has a tribunal? Within the WTO, one thing Donald Trump is not incorrect in saying is that China has been the most egregious defier and violator of WTO norms among all the major trading nations, whether it's currency manipulation, whether it's hidden subsidies, dumping, you name it, China tops the list. And everybody will privately tell, all the private governments will privately tell you this. So China all of these put together means that the countries around China on the maritime side, and even a few like Mongolia on the land side, are increasingly nervous as to what was China's final endgame, because China keeps pushing the envelope. The South China Sea was not part of what they had ever claimed before territorially. Their argument that Xi's claim that we will now be a model for the rest of the world to follow, even domestically, was something they said that they would never do. They had always said previously, we will never build a base, a military base overseas. Now they're picking up bases wherever they can. So China keeps moving the pendulum as its power grows. So needless to say, a lot of countries are nervous, and India and the United States are key among them. But we've seen Japan, we've now seen Indonesia, which is a country that was otherwise very neutral about China, and Malaysia, which was a country that used to be very supportive of China. After the recent election, you see Mahathir, who himself was a person who was considered very pro-Chinese, openly saying that these giant infrastructure projects that China is building in Malaysia have to be scrapped.
Right.
And all over the world, you can see this type of concern about it. Zimbabwe is holding an election right now in which one of the opposition's primary planks is to throw out all Chinese investors.
Sure.
Why? Because China has demanded, as part of the Belt Road Initiative, that all facial recognition software of all Zimbabweans be handed over to China. They will have a database of the facial recognition of all Zimbabweans.
Right.
And the opposition has said this is a very bizarre demand that clearly infringes on the digital sovereignty of our country.
Sure.
So this is why a lot of countries are now nervous. Where is China going to stop, and what exactly is the point of a lot of what they're doing?
And they're all looking up to the US and India probably to try and deal with the dragon. Taking the discussion forward and looking ahead, Ambassador, the 2+2 dialogue is scheduled to take place in July between India and the United States. What can we expect from that?
Definitely China will be a major issue of discussion, and whatever has happened, and taking on from here, China has been extremely aggressive and assertive. And what the problem in Indo-Pacific so far has been that the United States was always seen as the dominant security provider in that region. And the United States presence has become more and more uncertain over the last year and a half. And that has made the countries in that region even more nervous. So they are looking at more towards India. So as United States has withdrawn, China's assertiveness has grown, because we see not only the fact that they are claiming 80% of the South China Sea, but they are also militarizing it. They are also creating new islands there. So China, of course, and since these countries are feeling nervous, so more and more, you would remember, Pramit mentioned about Malaysia. You remember in the 1990s earlier, it was the East Asia Summit that was proposed by Mahathir himself, because he wanted to keep the United States out. And then the US and Japan said, no, nothing doing. And that is how the ASEAN +3 summit format was created. And then subsequently, ASEAN plus India format was created. So Mahathir, who was so supportive of closer engagement of ASEAN with China, has flipped completely to the other side. Similarly, also Indonesia, Vietnam, of course, we saw. Philippines, you asked the question, my point would be that Philippines was right when it took China to the Hague Arbitral Tribunal. The mistake was that Philippines succumbed to the threats and inducements of China after the award was declared in July 2016, and China summarily rejected it. And Philippines could have taken this forward and got all the countries together, and they were wanting to do it. But it succumbed because
change in leadership as well.
Change in leadership.
Yes.
That was the reason. It succumbed, and it said because Chinese stopped sending their tourists, China stopped importing the bananas. So that was enough to sort of bring them literally to their knees. So all the countries here are very, very nervous. So China would be one issue of discussion. Afghanistan would be another issue of discussion. We've seen what has been happening there. And I think on the bilateral level, India has signed the LEMOA, the Logistic Exchange Memorandum Agreement. There are two other so-called foundational agreements that are there. I think on that discussions have been going on, BECA and COMCASA. So on that, I'm sure things will take place. I think very important discussions are likely to take place on CAATSA. You know, in August 2017, what happened last year, United States Congress has put these restrictions, these sanctions, that if countries are going to trade with or have economic relations with Russia, with Iran and with North Korea, then they will have to face sanctions. And India is importing these S-400 Triumph systems,
air defense
yes,
ballistic
missile defense system from there. Also, I think now in October, when the summit between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin takes place, the agreement for import and progressive manufacture of Kamo 226T helicopters is also going to be signed. So these are major issues. Then relations also with Iran would come up, I'm sure.
Right.
That is in terms of construction of the Chabahar port. But there we'll have to work with them. You know, we've got positive statements coming both from Secretary Defense Jim Mattis, when he has written to the Congress, saying that a waiver should be provided to countries like India and Vietnam, those who are not really the target of our sanctions.
Sure.
So Chabahar from Iran also will, and also our oil imports from Iran.
Right.
So I think it's going to be a full agenda, it's going to be a full plate that this 2+2 dialogue will have to deal with, contend with.
Right. The ambassador is suggesting that it's going to be a full plate when India and the United States meet at the 2+2 dialogue. Captain Lele, you know, our dealings with Iran and Russia, do you think that they're going to be a hindrance when it comes to India-US ties, or is that not going to be so much of a problem, really?
I think India understands that these are the problem areas. So if you really look at the backdrop of how India appears to be preparing for this dialogue, is that you had Defense Secretary as well as Foreign Secretary of India visiting United States. You had NSA visiting United States. On the sidelines of G20 at Buenos Aires, you had General V.K. Singh, India's Foreign Minister for the state, meeting with a deputy of the USA. So all those things appears to be at least discussed and debated in all these meetings, and we are trying to find a way out, because this is a dialogue which involves both defense as well as diplomacy. As far as diplomacy is concerned, South China Sea, Afghanistan, these are the issues which are ongoing issues which will continue to remain. But as far as defense aspects are concerned, particularly signing of, since we have already signed the logistical agreement, signing of two other agreements will be a key focus, and US will try their level best as far as signing of those two agreements are there. But there could be certain amount of issues in regard to signing those agreements in regards to strategic autonomy of India, because there is one agreement which is about compatibility and interoperability of the communication systems, and other agreement involves geospatial intelligence. So all these agreements essentially could lead to US getting direct access to the strategic level as well as the tactical level intelligence as far as India's armed forces are concerned, Indian bases are concerned.
Sure.
Then tomorrow when US will sell certain amount of their weaponry to India, they will make it sure that only these types of mechanisms are put in place. Today when we are talking of importing S-400, definitely there are issues which are connected with interoperability. So as far as US is concerned, they fully understand that India is not going to give up so easily. Because if you really look at a percentage wise, India purchases more than 60% of its weaponry from Russia. As far as US is concerned, it's 15%, and if I'm not wrong, Israel is around 10 to 11%. So from that point of view, what is in the interest of US is to ensure that the gap between Russia and US minimizes. There is a significant gap and it's not going to get minimized like this.
Okay.
That's the reason probably they are trying to push these types of agreements where India could get bogged down.
Right. You know, Pramit, as far as the 2+2 dialogue is concerned, how do you believe that we should approach it? And do you think that it is actually going to happen in July? Because in the past we've seen that it has been postponed.
Well, the past two times it's been postponed is because of changes in the Trump administration, Pompeo, for example, replacing Tillerson. Right now, it seems that the key people that we will be working with, the NSA, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, all of them are stable, if you wish, under the Trump administration. So I don't expect any changes. We're definitely not having any, we won't have any problems on that front. And as far as personnel are concerned, I think the real issue that we will have is going to be the trade side. The one difference that the Trump administration is from previous ones is he does not see trade as a subset of the strategic relationships. He sees that trade as a separate track, and he's not prepared to make any concessions to us. So we will have to give up, and he's right on that because it is actually illegal. Our export subsidy structure is now in violation of the WTO. But more contentions, more will be the industrial tariffs, is Harley-Davidson motorcycle business. The issue of price controls for medical devices, which I know the President is personally very, very exercised about. And the normal IPR issues. I'm not overly worried about the Iran side of CAATSA because if you remember last time the Iran sanctions were imposed by America, Choudhary was given an exemption.
Right.
And the Americans are already signaling that that exemption will be given again. Russia, however, will be much more difficult because in the Russian case, it is not the White House that is driving the policy, it is the US Congress.
Yeah.
And the US Congress has now become, both the Republicans and the Democrats have joined hands in being completely phobic about the Russians.
Sure.
And are very unwilling to give any any leeway on that issue.
Right. Quick closing comment from you, Ambassador, and then I have to wrap up the show.
Yeah, you know, just one comment on this. I think there will be maybe some discussion on trade relations and what are the problems, etc. But there is a separate dialogue, strategic commercial dialogue. And I think what the attempt, because this is the first one, and there is such a huge agenda. So in my view, there'll be an attempt to put these trade issues of IPRs, market access, etc. to the commercial dialogue.
Right.
But here another aspect that would come is, I think, in terms of the Make in India program,
Sure.
in terms of the DTTI, Defense Trade Initiative, technology initiative, that nothing much seems to have moved in that direction. So what is it that, what are the new technologies that India can get from there and that we can start manufacturing here? Because there have been a number of agreements signed, but the forward movement has been rather limited in all these
Sure.
things. So I think that is going to be one particular issue. On the Iran question, just one last comment. I think what we have seen is that Mr. Trump is really looking for a regime change in Iran as a result of this withdrawal from the nuclear deal. So I will not be so very confident that the carve-out exception that we got for Choudhary last time would be forthcoming this time also. We'll have to wait and see.
Okay, we'll indeed have to wait and see. Of course, July is not too long away from today, and all will be revealed in due course of time. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback and suggestions at indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha Television. That's it from me. See you again next time.